future date, like.
No, that's not future. The budget would be future, right?
It's not how much your income compared to your, got it?
It's cash in and cash out over some period of time, right? So not a snapshot. It's more like a movie than a picture, right? The income statement, not exactly, but okay. And on the balance sheet, right? On one side, we have all our assets, right? And they're grouped by category, yeah. And then each one of the categories has a subtotal, okay? And at the very bottom, when you get down to the last category, you do a bottom line total for the assets, yep. And then the liabilities are over on the other side of the sheet, right? That's also grouped by categories. And so what was the one on that? It was the payment that some of you guys thought might go on the balance sheet.
Auto payment.
Yeah. Now that auto payment of $250, where would that actually go?
That would go into the income.
On the income statement, right? I think they threw that in there as just a little twist for you. But then you get your liability categories all subtotaled. You add those up, right? And then after you get the assets and liabilities, you can calculate what? Yeah, well, your net worth, right? What you thought, yeah, right? Okay, or your net, also known as equity, huh?
Which if you do, you can know if you're positive or not.
Yeah, if you have a positive net worth, you're considered solvent. If you have a negative net worth, you're considered insolvent. Just using the word insolvent, it's not like it's the end of the world and your life is over and bankruptcy and demise are sure to follow. I mean, it's something you can fix over time, okay? And the assets we list on the balance sheet, do we list the assets at the purchase price when we bought these assets? Like a business would do on their balance sheet?
No.
How do we list them?
We list them at current value.
Current fair market value, right? And that can be kind of tricky to estimate for some things, right? But other things, it's actually not too bad. Like how would you find the value of your automobile?
It was look up on Kelly Blue Book.
Kelly Blue Book, NADA, Auto Trader, something like that. Okay. There's also sites out there to estimate the value of your home. Okay, you can put some info. Well, I think it's like if you put in your actual address, it'll give you an estimate. Somewhere out there in the ether, the details of your home will be available in some data set, and they can estimate, you know, an appraisal for it. What about other things like things that don't really have a ready website for valuing, like I don't know, like your artwork tools?
You can estimate it.
Where might you look? Is there any sites out there where things get bought and sold?
eBay.
Okay, right. So you could go poke around on there and kind of see, oh, here's an item that I own, right? And what's it selling for, you know? And if it's not exactly the item or the age of it, you can kind of add or subtract from it and get a fairly decent estimate, okay? And at the very end of the balance sheet, what is that called? Where we take the liabilities plus the net worth. What should that add up to? Yeah, it should add up to your assets. That's called the balance sheet identity. Okay, so you want to pop that in there, and if it doesn't add up to that, then maybe you made an error. So, and we filled this out. That's, again, this isn't filled out of a new copy I have you, so maybe you want to jot those, you know, numbers in there from yesterday. And then I thought I went to the bottom. Next. So we did do the income and expense statement yesterday, right? We talked about it. We looked at it in the book, right? Okay. Now the income and expense, right? Especially the expenses. Do you record your expenses as a cash accounting or accrual accounting? Remembers. Cash, right? You guys know what accrual is?
No.
I mean, I mentioned it quickly, I guess. So accrual, I mean, like if any of you go on to take accounting, you know, and work for a company as an accountant, they keep their books and income statements on what's called an accrual basis, right? So if they purchase inventory, right, but they don't pay for it right away, or supplier, like gives them not a line of credit, it's supplier credit, right? So they deliver the inventory, they have 30 days to pay. They put that on their expense report right away, even though cash didn't go out, okay? But then in accounting, when they put that expense on the expense report, the offset has to go somewhere, right? It's not going to go, they're not going to offset it with cash, right? It's going to be offset by an equal amount in accounts payable. Anyway, but you guys will do it on a cash basis, or personal balance sheets are on a cash basis. Okay. Oh, here, I think somebody missed this stuff on the quiz and the test. On the balance sheet, you list your income how? As with the taxes, without the, not the income, I'm sorry, scratch that, I misspoke. On the income and expense statement, do you list your income, your take home, or your full gross? Like, if you can't remember, it's right there, right? Okay, it's the gross, right? So, like, before they take any of the taxes or anything out. But then how do you account for that then on that very same statement? Is there a category for those expenses, like maybe federal taxes, right?
Yeah.
Withholding, state withholding, right? You can put that on your expenses, okay? That makes sense. Then of course, fixed and variable expenses. Know the difference between those. What kind of things would be fixed expenses each month? Would you say? Fixed. Well, okay, all right. Now, okay, there are some electric companies offer a plan for a flat rate, right? And it's usually, so what they do is they'll take the average you use for like a year and then offer you a flat rate that's maybe a little higher than that average, right?
Cable,
but generally it's very,
like cable.
Cable, yeah, cable would be.
More like subscription.
What is it?
Like subscription sources. Right.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah, but I noticed Netflix keep bumping up their price every few months so too, so maybe that's like a hybrid fixed and variable, I don't know. But you maybe categorize it as fixed. Fixed that just keeps changing, I guess. What about installment loans? Would they be fixed or variable?
Variable.
Remember what an installment loan is? Well, maybe I better ask it like versus a revolving line of credit. If you have an installment loan, say to purchase a car, is that loan then available to get more money from if you want to say buy another car, or do you have to reapply for another loan?
You have to reapply.
Right, so that's an installment loan, that's it, you borrowed that much money, that's it for that transaction, right? And you make regular monthly payments every month for 3 years to 5 years, whatever it is, okay? That's an installment loan. What would be a revolving credit type for your payments? And it might change.
So, utility bills.
That's not credit. We're talking about credit, not utilities. So installment is one lump sum cash you borrow to buy something and pay back the same amount every month until it's all paid off. What would be the revolving type or open type? Just think of another type of credit other than, I would say, a car loan or mortgage. Somebody will get it. What other type of credit or debt is out there other than auto loans, mortgages? No, that's not credit. You know, where you borrow money. Some people, I'll give you a hint, they can get some people into trouble financially.
Oh, cable.
Mm-hmm.
Payables?
No. Well, if you're a business, I suppose a payable would be kind of a revolving thing, but we're talking about individuals. You don't have accounts payable unless you have inventory. Credit cards? Right? What does that mean, revolving?
I mean, the interest change?
No. That doesn't change. Well, that's the same with all, right?
You put different amounts of money in.
Well, so when you are borrowing using a credit card, revolving credit, it's not one lump sum of cash that you use one time and then pay that amount back, right? You have a credit limit. Let's say you get approved for a credit card, you have maybe a $5,000 limit, right? And you can go out and keep using that credit card multiple times, until you hit that limit. But every time you use it, what happens to the balance? It increases, and so what happens to your monthly payment? It goes up as the balance increases, or as you pay it down, then your monthly payment will decrease. So that would be like a revolving debt, or as the book calls it, open credit. Anybody, do you know another one? Maybe you don't know this one. I don't know if I mentioned it yesterday or not. Home equity line of credit. Everybody heard of one of those? HLLC. Well, you know what a mortgage is, right? Where you borrow to buy a home? Yeah. Okay. So you do know that a lot of times people will refinance their home, right? Because maybe they need some money to do something else. I did it a few years ago.
Oh, so it's like a home improvement fund.
That can be, right? But even a refinance will be an installment loan. But there's another type of home loan mortgage where it acts like a credit card. Right, and it's called the home equity line of credit. So you get approved for this line of credit up to some certain amount. It kind of works like a credit card. So you can use that amount up to whatever that limit is, but it's based on your home as collateral, right? And you can go and purchase things. A lot of people will use it to do home improvements, right? Because as they go along, they don't need to spend the whole thing all at once, right? They get one particular, okay, I got to pay the contractors to get the kitchen remodeled, right? And they need payments, 1/3 before they start. Somewhere in the middle of the job, they'll need another third of what they write, so you don't have to sit with one lump sum and make payments on that. Does it make sense? So home equity line of credit kind of works like a credit card. So that'd be revolving, and that would be a variable expense if you had it. Okay, and we did 2-4, yes? Oh, some ratios, right? So we had 4 ratios, right? 2 of them came off the balance sheet, and the other 2 come off of the income statement. We kind of need to know how to calculate them and what they tell you, right? So the first one that we list here that comes off of the balance sheet numbers would be your solvency ratio. All right? Remember on the balance sheet, when is it that you're solvent? When are you solvent when you look at your balance sheet? The net worth is positive, right? And when are you insolvent?
When it's nice day.
Okay. Well, so that's a binary situation, right? Either solvent or insolvent. Wouldn't you believe that there are degrees of solvency?
Yes.
What if your net worth is only $1? It's positive. You can say you're solvent, right? Right. So if I use this ratio, and my assets are worth $1 more than my liabilities, okay, it's a little more useful to know exactly how solvent you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so you can take that net worth and divide it by your total assets, okay, and get a percentage. Liquidity ratio also comes off the balance sheet. Just the name of it right here, liquidity, tells you what type of assets are going to go into that calculation. Liquid, thank you.
Liquid,
Yeah.
liquid assets. That means they can be liquidated in less than a year.
Yep, cash, and cash equivalents. Remember those?
Yeah, cash.
They can be either cash or can be converted to cash within a year. Okay. And what does the liquidity ratio tell you?
It tells you how much liquid assets you can get. Kind
of not. It's right here. Your ability to pay which debts?
Going.
Your long-term? No, the current debts, right? The ones that are payable within a year, okay? So it tells you, like, you got stuff that's upcoming, it needs to be paid off within the next year. How able are you to take care of that, be able to actually pay those off, okay? Then the other two ratios came off the income and expense statement. There's the savings ratio, okay? So that's just the cash surplus divided by your net income. That makes sense, right? Because if you have a cash surplus, that means you're not doing what with all your income?
That means you're not spending.
Not spending it all, and so it's available for savings, right?
Yeah.
Could you have a negative savings ratio?
Yes.
Because
You can be paying.
you could have a what?
Deficit.
A deficit, that would be a negative number, right? And you'd have a negative savings ratio. Not ideal, okay? But it's probably more common than you think. And then the other ratio, the debt, this is the one that bankers will use a lot, okay? They kind of realize, we called it the debt to income when I was at the bank, or debt service ratio. So you take your total monthly loan payments, divide it by your monthly gross income. And I don't remember what the book says about the percent. I think, did they say 35?
Yeah.
I'm going to say prefer less than 35%. Okay? Because if your loan payments are higher than 35% of your gross income, then what does that mean?
That means it's not. That means it's more. That means you can't actually get a loan. Get a loan or more.
Indirectly, but directly, let's say that your debt service ratio is at 80%. What would that tell the banker?
That means you can't really pay back your loan.
Well, you'd have trouble, right? You're real likely to get into trouble and not be able to pay your loans back or any new loan that they might be considering. So it's a measure of risk for the bank, isn't it? It's how one of the ways they evaluate your risk. Yeah.
What if you can't pay? When you can't pay your loan?
Well, the question's a little more complicated than that. I'd have to ask you that. Okay, for how long have you not been able to pay them, and why, and what kind of loans are we talking about? So, in the immediate short term, if you're doing your bills one day, so I'm a little short for this payment. Most, especially installment loans, have what's called a grace period, right? They usually allow 5 days to 15 days past the payment due date before they assess a late charge, right? Okay, and usually, you know about the credit scores, right?
Yeah.
Lenders report your activity and your promptness to the credit bureaus, and usually they won't report anything until you have a payment that's 30 days late or more. Okay, so you go out to 29 days and not have your credit report affected, but you probably have a sizable late fee, which sucks. Okay, credit cards are a lot more inflexible on that. Sometimes if like you're a day late, they charge you $30, on top of the $25 payment that was due. So then if you go a little bit longer than that, and this varies from lender to lender, you could be looking at, say, repossession, right? Like if you can't make your car payment and that goes on for like 3 or 4 months and you haven't made a payment, it's not stealing. It's all part of the agreement that you sign when you take out that loan, right? You agree to the fact that if you default on your payments, that the bank owns the car.
How? How are they going to get the car?
Well, they repossess it. They come and get it and take it. Well, okay, so we're going to love time. Well, that's great. So when you use an automobile loan to buy a car, that car is called collateral, right? And so that lessens the risk to the bank, right? Does that make sense? So every time a bank lends money, they're taking a risk, right?
Yeah.
And to mitigate that risk, they'll use the automobile or your home and a mortgage for collateral, right? Which gives them a little security in that if you default, right, then they have something of value they can come and get and then sell it. They don't like to, right? Because they're not really set up to be, you know, an auto dealership, right, or work in real estate, right?
So they sell to real
And
estate.
so, here's the other thing, right? If the auto loan, if you use that car as collateral, it reduces the bank's risk. And so what do you think happens to the interest rate that you pay if their rate of risk is reduced?
Not if you get more interest.
No, they get, it's a lower interest rate because their risk is reduced, right? The higher the risk, the more return you want. And that's something we'll get into a little later, right? Today probably. Right? And now sometimes you want to borrow, you want to buy a car, maybe use what's called a personal loan where there's no collateral, right? They just, they lend you money based on your good looks, right? Credit score and all that, and your debt to income ratio, stuff like that, right? But that's riskier, right? Because if it's just a personal loan with no collateral, right? They don't have any recourse if you don't pay, right? They have no asset to come and collect. So what do you think the interest rate would be compared to a collateralized loan? They have more risk. It's higher. Thank you, Casper. Okay. Yeah, how do they repossess cars? They have different ways to do that. Oh, and by the way, the title to your car, if you use an auto loan, it will have recorded what's called a lien on it, right? It'll show. So like if you go to try to sell the car, so there's a lien on this thing. I don't want anything to do with it, right? Because they might buy your car, the bank will just come and get it from them, right? And when you pay off the loan, the lien gets released, you get a clean title back from the DMV. So when I worked at the bank, we had to repossess things every now and then. This is kind of a new story. When there was a guy that operated a limo service that our bank did finance, helped him buy a couple of limousines for, right? And it turned out he went insolvent, and couldn't make his payments anymore, and we had to repossess a limousine. So at the bank, back in the back parking lot, we had this big white stretch limousine in the back. And it was right around the time my younger son was born. That was back in 2000. And so my wife saw her at the hospital, and I think she was there for they were there for probably 3 days, so I was back at work, and my branch manager, he says, you're going to pick up your wife and kid tomorrow morning, right? I said, yeah. Yeah. He says, just repossess that limousine back there. We'll take that. So he found this like limousine driver derby hat kind of thing. So he was the driver, and pulled up into the loop there with this big limo, and I went in to get her, and had the car seat strapped into the limousine, so it's kind of cool. Then we walked out, with Jonathan there, and where's the car? It's right there in front of you. So that's kind of neat. That really probably something we shouldn't have done, but no harm, no foul.
I don't think you did a call that's not for the bank.
Yeah, well, it was the bank's technically, so it wasn't that bad thing, right? But anyway. Okay, so that's kind of a review of yesterday. Let's move on to this stuff here in 2.5, preparing and using budgets. So what is a budget?
It's a cash basis.
Yep, good for you. But if you want to help answering the question, you might look in the notes I gave you right after the word budget. Casper, help everybody out.
Short-term planning report to help achieve short-term goals.
See how sharp he is? Okay. And the income and expenses you put on your budget are for the future, right? So do you know for sure exactly what those income and expenses will be?
Yeah.
You do?
No.
For like a year ahead, year out? You don't know for sure, but can you make a reasonable estimate?
Yeah.
Based on what?
Based on forecasting the income.
And forecasting your, not just income, expenses, right? Remember we talked about, how do we put these statements together? The balance sheet and all that. Where do you get that information from? Talked about it yesterday.
You get from your
Ledger?
Yeah.
right? You kind of keep a ledger,
Yeah, people like doing it.
things that you spend money on, right? Receipts of things, right? It's kind of annoying, but if you do it for a while, then you can kind of forecast out, right? Say, okay, this category is usually about $200 a month, right? So maybe if I can cut back on that, I can budget 175 a month, right? Going into the future, maybe, right? So you can make some estimates, okay? So forecasting income, that's actually not the hardest part, right? Because if you have a job, especially, you know, what's the part-time, your hours vary, right? You have a pretty good idea what your monthly income is going to be, which usually stays the same for a year out, right? Until you get your cost of living increase, okay? And you're going to want to use what? Gross or net? Casper? As is indicated by the word net that I'm pointing to. Now I'm disappointed in you. I thought so.
Use net or take home pay.
Net, yeah, right. The net is the take-home pay. That's right. That's that whole number on your pay stub, right? Not the gross. Okay, so it's unlike the balance sheet. Forecasting expenses, right? You want to try and use the year's previous expenses. Work that out. You got your categories just like you would on the income statement.
Allow for fund money.
Yeah, that's in there. Because sometimes you can get so hardcore about your budget that it becomes miserable, maybe, right? And if things become miserable, if something you're doing becomes miserable, what are you more likely to do?
Not care.
Yeah, not follow through with it, right? The whole thing sucks, right? So, little, I guess you call it a bleed-off valve or something, right? Then finalizing the budget, okay? At the end, you know, all your estimates, you want to see, okay, am I going to have a surplus or a deficit here, right? If you end up with a deficit in your budget, go back and start tweaking some things, right? If your income equals or exceeds expenses, you have a balanced budget, okay? Which is especially good to see when you get to the end of your budget, and yes, it did balance, okay? They have, let's see, let's find it in the book. I'd say it was on page 42. So that's one of the worksheets I gave you. Oh, we gotta go away. We'll just do it this way, maybe 2.5, isn't it? 2. That's kind of small, right? But notice it kind of resembles the income and expense statement a little bit, right? But it goes out for a year, month by month, right? Here's your income and the categories, okay? Expenses, hopefully it's got the same categories as on your income and expense statement to make makes things convenient, all right? Then you total up each one, and then down here, surplus or deficit. Now, do you notice some of these numbers are in parentheses?
Yeah.
Does anybody know what that means?
That means that's more of an estimate.
That's what?
An estimate.
No. So conventionally in finance and accounting, negative numbers are put in parentheses, okay, instead of using a negative side.
A lot.
Well, because it used to be before there was like color printing was available, or even characters like, I don't know. So red is often used as negative, right? But if you can't print in color, as you couldn't say 100 years ago, right? You had to indicate negative some other way, and they put parentheses around it, and it just kind of stuck, okay? So in accounting and finance, when you see a number in parentheses, that means negative or deficit, all right? Yeah, let's go back to these notes here. Forecasting expense, we talked about that. Finalizing. So if you do have a deficit, right, in your budget, there are some things you can do, and there are some things that you can do that are better than others to rectify a deficit, okay? So there's basically two cases. Maybe your annual budget balances, right? The whole thing over the year in the aggregate balances, right, at the end of the year, okay? But maybe within that year, certain months had deficits, right?
Yeah.
But then certain others had surpluses, you follow me? And that's pretty common, that can happen, okay? So what could you do about that? You're gonna have months with surpluses, what could you do?
You can sort of into the fund balance, to deficit.
Right, sometimes, like, if you know you have something that's due in June, and you know June is gonna have a deficit, right? And you know May is gonna have a surplus, maybe pay that thing in May, right? So shift that expense to when you have a month that's a surplus. Preferably a month ahead and not the month after, because you know, want to have late fees and all that stuff, right? Your surpluses, right? It might be really tempting to say, I got a surplus this month, I'm going to go out and spend it and go nuts. But what really should you do?
Save it.
Yeah, keep it, you know, roll it over to the next month. That's going to be a deficit, and hopefully it'll even out. Yeah. The other thing you could do is you could use, for any given month, you could use cash from your savings account, liquidate some of your investments, or borrowing like credit cards. And C here is probably the least preferable way to do that, right? Does that make sense? But if you do have to do that, like okay, I got to pay this car loan or car payment with my credit card, right? Because I have a deficit this month. So it's not the end of the world, right? You don't want to do that, incur more debt. So the next month, maybe you have a surplus. What should you do with that credit card balance that you borrowed? Take your surplus the next month and do what? Pay back the credit card, right, immediately, so you don't carry a balance, have to pay interest and all that, okay? Now, the other case is maybe the annual budget in general has a deficit, okay? So that's a little tougher to deal with, right? Than a month-to-month deficit where other months have surpluses. So maybe the entire as a whole is a deficit.
You could apply for the expenses.
Yep, you could, or investments, or borrow to cover. Notice I indicated bad, but if you have to.
How do you borrow money if you don't, you know,
Credit cards, personal loan, refinance your mortgage, right? Something like that. Which is not ideal, but sometimes it has to be done. You can recover from it, but you want to try and avoid that kind of solution, right? Better way would be to, okay, this upcoming budget year, I'm going to cut some low priority expenses, right? Some things that I really don't need, right? And maybe that's enough to get you back into balance. Increase income, that's a little more difficult, right? Because then, well, maybe you got to go find another job, you got to work some more hours, right? Labor intensive, not enough time in the day. And the book didn't mention this, but sometimes when you have a payment due on something, like maybe your mortgage, right? You have a shortfall, you can call them and request to make what's called an interest-only payment. So if you realize when you make a loan payment, part of that payment is interest, the other part is principal. Okay? The bank's really interested in interest, okay? And sometimes they'll allow you to make just the interest portion of that payment, which could be significantly lower than the whole payment, right? And they'll just keep that balance on to the end of a loan, right? So that's one method. And also, some of your goals that you made when you started this whole thing. If you're running a deficit, couldn't you toss some of those? Maybe weren't all that important. Maybe, you know, you really hoped you could, but I just can't do that. Okay, so there's ways to handle deficits that are good and some that are not so good. So using your budget, it's only useful if you use it, right? And it's only useful if you do what else? Okay. Everybody hear the expression garbage in, garbage out when it comes to data?
Yes.
So if the records you're keeping are not being kept well,
That means it's not going to be used.
then you're basing your budget on garbage, and then your budget will be garbage, for lack of a better way to phrase it, right? If you keep a careful ledger, right, you're going to have a better budget. Okay. So there's also a budget control schedule. You guys read that? That's one of the, I think that's one of the worksheets I handed you there. It's the one that has a column, I think it's its variance. Let's go to page 46.
Monthly budget.
It's not the, yeah. It says monthly budget up there. It should be titled something else, but it's not the actual budget. But do you see what happens here? You had that big budget, right, for the year, and at the end of the year, right, you want to kind of take a look and see, or you could do it each month, by the way. These are what I budgeted for these income and expenses. This is what I actually incurred in debts and income, right? And what's that third column?
Third column is variance.
The variance, right? How was your budget different from what really happened? Okay? So then you can really start to analyze this stuff.
That means like late fees or.
Right, and so you'll calculate this by just doing, so column 3, that third column, this isn't right down here. You just take column 2 minus column 1. And it doesn't, don't try and overthink it because of, you know, income and expense differences, right? You might get to the expense and say, oh, which way do I subtract those? So just always do column 2 minus column 1, and that'll give you this, right? And again, this 50 here, what does that mean? You see it?
Times that 50 is a negative.
It's a negative 50, okay? So in the expenses, that's good, right? Because that's $50 less expense than you had planned on, so that's good. But if it was parentheses up in the income, that would suck a little more, right? That means less income than you budgeted, right? I'd put a fourth column on there, by the way. Anybody else think maybe there should be a fourth column here or so? What would it be? This is your dollar variance, right? But what might be more helpful to see? To directly compare all of these discrepancies. What do we use? What kind of mathematical trick do we use to directly compare things that are really different? Come on. All right, I'll just percent. Oh, percent.
Yeah.
I'd put a column with percent over there.
Yeah,
I like to see that, right?
Different.
Yeah, because like maybe that negative 50 is that, wow, is that a lot or not a lot compared to other things, right? Is it a lot compared to this negative 15? I don't know for sure until I put it all into a percent, right?
Yeah, you know how much.
Yeah, maybe this is like negative 1%, and maybe that's, you know, negative 30%, even though the numbers are different, right? So I'd have a percent column there. We're going to get on here in a minute too. Yes, time value of money. Let's see here. Okay, so here you go. Column 3 equals column 2 minus column 1, right? And I would say any category with variances, you know, 5 to 10%, you should take a close look at them and try and figure out why they vary, right? And if you find out why they vary, then we go about trying to rectify that, right? Okay, so time value of money. This is like, this topic here in finance is like key solid core of the science, as it were, of finance. Time value of money. Money has different values at different times to you, to whatever individual. So let me ask you a question. Ryan, let's say that I owe you $10 and I've agreed to pay you that $10 2 months from now. Right? And you've agreed, okay, you can pay me in 2 months. Right? But let me ask you this. If I paid that $10 to you now, would it be more valuable to you than getting it in 2 months? Yes or no? Would you rather have it now? You would. Why? Well, that's one reason. Yeah, so mitigate the risk of like me forgetting. Okay. Yeah, Antonio, why would you rather have the $10 right now as opposed to 2 months from now?
Because it will result in you not having to wait was you saw not having ruining your friendship or personal relationship due to.
Yeah. Right. And I guess, so this example kind of violates what I was talking about earlier, right? Let me make it a more meaningful number instead of $10. How about $500? I've agreed to pay you back $500 2 months from now. Why would you rather have it today, that $500?
Because because you don't want to lose $500.
Well, no, I'm going to pay it back in 2 months. Sam?
Just invest in stocks.
You can do stuff with it now, right?
Okay.
Would you rather have that money available to you right now or in 2 months?
But you can look at an emergency fund. Like,
Well, that doesn't answer my question. Would you rather have it now, the $500, or 2 months from now? Which one?
right now.
Now, because you can do stuff. Then it's available to you to spend or invest, right? And that's kind of key, right? You can do stuff with it, like invest it and earn what? Profit, interest, right? So let me ask you, how much more would you want it now than 2 months? Would you be willing to take a little less than 500 if you could get it now? If I could say, all right, $500 I'll pay you 2 months from now, but right now, if you want it today, I'll give you $450. Think about that. Would you take that right now instead of the 500 in 2 months? I'll give you $450 right now. We'll call you.
Would I lose my $550?
Well, you're getting $450.
No, what
Okay, you're losing 50, right? But that's my question. Is it worth $50 to you? You all said you wanted it now.
No,
So is that desire to have it now worth $50 to you to get it right now?
no.
It does, right? It also depends on what you think you can do with it, right? Right? Could you earn that $50 back if you invested it, Sam, in a couple months, maybe? Could be, right? Okay. Let me try it this way. What if I said, okay, instead of $500, let's call it 6 months. Instead of giving you $500, making you wait 6 months for it, would you take $475 right now today?
Yeah. Because I can gain more money after.
So it's worth more to you now in the present than it is in the future, correct?
Yeah, because
All
I
right.
gain more after than just simply waiting.
Correct. So that is the gist of the time value of money. It's worth more to you now, getting paid right now. It's worth enough to you now that you might discount it, right? Didn't you all discount that $500?
Yeah.
Some of you take 25 less, some of you take 50 less, right? Right? And you discounted it because it's worth more to you now. Does that make sense? Okay. It turns out we can work this out precisely mathematically. This time value, this present value of $1 and the future value of $1. So you would agree that $1 now is worth more to you in the present and worth less to you in the future. Because in the future, that if you had it, it could grow, couldn't it, Sam? You could make it grow, couldn't you? Okay.
But stocks or other things.
Right. So receiving $1 today is worth more than that same dollar in the future, right? And the converse is also true. You guys remember the compound interest formula you learned back in, I think it was kindergarten?
Yeah.
Maybe? Remember, maybe it didn't look exactly like that, but does that look familiar?
Yeah, pretty much looks like that.
And this one's specific to finance, right?
Yeah.
It's exponential growth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. And you probably use different variables back in algebra 2 or whatever. But the B here is balance at maturity, okay? P is the principal. Principal is like an initial amount invested, okay? That could grow, Sam, right? You would take that 475, put it in there for that P at some annual interest rate R, right? And you did learn about compounding at some point, did you? Compound interest? No, they don't. In algebra 2, right, still? They change that stuff a lot, right? So N would be the number of compounding periods per year. So if you compound monthly, how many times is it compounded per year? 12, right? So that means it earns interest 1 month, then it earns interest on that new balance the next month, right? So it's exponential growth, okay? And T is time in years, okay? And this is the basis of the time value of money. And it works for money going to you, right? Right, when I need to pay you back that 500, I'll pay you what, right? And it works for money that you borrow, okay? You have to pay back with payments, okay? Mortgage. Why do people borrow money to buy a house?
Because they want a house.
They borrow, you know, say $200,000 to get that money now in the present, right?
Yeah, because they don't want to wait to get a house.
Because otherwise, 200,000, right? It would take you 40 years to get that. So it's more valuable to you now. And so you pay interest on that. So over the life of that mortgage loan, for a $200,000 loan, you might end up at the end of the, say, 30 years, paying back to the bank a total of all your payments of like $450,000 for receiving the $200,000 today. So would you say that that $200,000 is worth a lot to you?
Yeah.
Right? Because you're willing to pay back at some point in the future $450,000 when the interest is all tabulated, right? So it is worth a lot to you, you know, to buy a home. Okay, so we have future value and present value. Have you guys read this far in the book yet?
I think so.
I would hope so by now. Okay, remember, I need you guys to kind of read this stuff before you come in here. So there's what's called the future value of a single deposit. What is future value and present value? Single deposit, like a lump sum of money, the $500.
So it's like interest.
And there's the future value and present value of what's called an annuity. Everybody heard of the term annuity? All right, so annuity, I'll go ahead just a little bit here, then we'll come back. An annuity, let's just say periodic. A periodic stream of equal cash flows. Okay? Everybody ever see those commercials like J.G. Wentworth? If you have an annuity, right, we'll give you cash now for it.
Yeah, I think so.
Right? They get a stupid song or whatever. It's my money and I want it now. Right? That means somebody is getting a stream of payments from maybe an insurance payout, right? An accident or something like that, right? And instead of all these payments coming to them, they'd like a lump sum. And we can calculate how much someone would be willing to pay, right, for that stream of payments now in the present. Anyway, so we have a formula for future value of a single deposit. So that's like you taking that $500, putting it in a savings account, Sam, or whoever, right, and earning interest on it. And here's the formula. The balance, B, at the end of some number of years, equals your principal times 1 plus the rate over N to the NT power, okay? And you just basically just plug and chug when you put things in there. I'm not going to emphasize using these formulas in this course. We do, if anybody takes the 222 with me, you need to get proficient because sometimes they can get really hairy and nasty. That one's not too bad. You've done it before. But there's another way to figure out the future value of a deposit. And in the back of your book, they have Appendix A through D. Take a look in the back of the book real quick. All the way in the back. Appendix A is what this one refers to. Let's see if I can pull it up here. You see it, this table of future value factors? So instead of using that formula I just gave you, you can take the principal, the lump sum principal. If you know the number of years, you see the period over here to the left? Yeah. And you know the interest rate, you can find a factor that you multiply by, and that'll tell you what the future value of that deposit is. Of course, it's going to depend on two things. The number of years you keep it invested, and what else? And the interest rate by which it's invested. Okay?
That means the higher the interest rate, the more money.
The higher the future value, yes, sir. Okay? So instead of using this formula, you can get the same result by doing the future value equals that principal, say the $500, times the future value factor that you get from that table. Okay? So go to page 46 now. And let's take it, maybe keep your finger on that appendix. We'll find it again in a minute. I might have to spill this lesson into tomorrow. That's fine. Okay. Page 46, there's an example. And this is in 246. Okay. Here, 6, future value. So they define annuity in here, and hopefully you know about compounding. Where's the example? Let me just see what it looks like in my book. Find these new there. 45, 46. It's kind of like 40, goes on 46 to 47.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's a lot. 260. Yeah. Oh, it's under 260. 260. All right. So future value of a single deposit. So here's the example, right? Somebody wants to accumulate $45,000 for down payment to buy a home, okay? So we can think of saving that money by sticking under your mattress, which doesn't do anything for you, right? Doesn't help you that much. Or you can put it into an account that earns interest, right? So $100 invested today at 5%, you'd have $105 at the end of the year, right? Are you with me?
Yeah, so
And if you did with 45,000, you'd have a whole heck of a lot more, right? So he needs 45,000, and I believe somewhere in here it explains that he's already saved up 5,000. Okay, so he's accumulated $5,000. Okay, and he knows that. And how long is it? He needs 6 years, right, to try and turn this into the 45,000, or get help getting there, right? So he goes to his future value table, takes that $5,000. So go to your future value table, okay, and look down the period column for 6 years, okay, and then go over to a rate of 5% and see if you can find this factor, that 1.340. I want to make sure you get wonderful experiences looking at the tape. Appendix A. Okay. So go down that left-hand column, because they're talking about 6 years here. So find the number 6. And then the rate, the annual rate is 5%. Go across to 5.
so it's 1.40.
1.340. You guys find it? Okay. So it's real simple. You just take the future value is that initial amount, the principal, times 1.340, and that 5,000 in 6 years will become $6,700. Okay, not quite enough to get us 45,000, right? But maybe you can do some other things, right? So in this example here, right, future value using Appendix A comes to $6,700. Now, if I put all that in the formula, by the way, yeah, here's the interesting thing about this book. They're always assuming annual compounding, right? So how many compounding periods per year if it's only compounded annual? 1. Normally it's monthly. And I had typed in here, when I put the formula in 12 for the number of compounding periods, and then I realized they're only doing annual. I put the correct number for the annual here, but I forgot to go back and change that 12 to a 1, okay? And I think they do that to keep it simple, all right? So if you use the formula correctly, so that would be 0.05 over 1 and then 1 times 6, right? You get close to what they had from the factor. We also have the calculator, and we kind of worked with that a little yesterday, right? So grab a calculator. Let's see if we can do this. We'll go to the finance feature. Notice what I did here. If you remember what that looks like, All right, when you get there, and we can review how to get to it. Let me pull this up. So the first thing is you can just, you don't have to open a document, just open up Scratchpad, right? All right, hit your menu, 8, and then the first choice there, I call it TVM again, okay? Now remember, it's only compounding annually, right? So if this was going to compound monthly, this N, I'd have to put 6 times 12, right? But it's not monthly.
It only takes times 1.
Yeah, so I'm just going to leave it as 6, okay? Now the interest rate is 5%. If it was compounded monthly, I'd have to put 5 divided by 12, but it's not. It's compounded just annually, so I don't have to mess with that, right? What does the PV mean? Present value, right? That's the 5,000 he's going to put into an account somewhere, right? That's the principal, in other words, yeah? So again, when money's going away from you, how do we make it look, the number? Negative, right? So I'm going to, in the PV, that's our principal in this, put in negative $5,000, okay? Now, once he puts that in the account, this field for payments, he's not going to make any other payments into this account to add to. He's just going to let it sit and grow in that 5%, right? So we leave the payment field as 0. And then we go down here and we want to know what's the future value of that 5,000 under these terms and conditions.
So it'll be 6,700.
So you go down there and hit enter, $6,700.48. Okay? So you have this available to you. You got the appendix in the back, right? If anyone's feeling real juicy, they can use the formulas. Okay? And so to help you remember, see how I kind of set this up in the notes I gave you to look like that string? Okay? And I kind of put a star next to the one you're going to hit enter on to get the value of it. All right? Some of these will be different. All right? So that's future value of a single deposit. All right? And you don't put any more money into it. There's also future value of an annuity. And actually, before we get to that, I suspect that you guys haven't read this too much. This can get a little bit confusing, right? So what I want, we're gonna bag it here for now, and I want you guys to read and maybe reread this section, this 2.6, especially as it pertains to annuities. All right, understand what an annuity is, and get some idea of how to calculate the value of it. Right, either the payment that's being made or what it's worth to you as a lump sum. Okay, and also the method called discounting. All right. All right. So let's take a break there.